We're good. We're live. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining me today on What's the CO2. I'm your host, Matt Martinez, and today we have a wonderful guest joining us. It is Pastor Scott Rains. Pastor Scott, he is the lead pastor at Church Hope in Ankeny. And some of us might be thinking, okay, I thought this was going to be a healthcare based podcast. Why do we have a pastor on today? Well, a big part of healthcare. For those of you that don't know, there's a chaplain in every hospital, at least one. And one of the sides that I don't think a lot of people think about is the emotional, the mental aspect of dealing with trauma, dealing with sudden grief, dealing with the unexpected turmoil and emotions that come with traumatic events, not just in the hospital, but just in daily life. Pastor Scott, thank you for coming on today.
Great to be here, Matt.
Yeah.
Super excited about it. As you were talking, so I graduated from seminary in May of 2001. So, like, this is my 25th year doing this pastor thing, and one of the things I've observed over the years is how when I go to the hospital to meet with people, to pray with people, many of them for like the first time in their life are having to come face to face with this reality that I am not in control. And I think most people are surprised by, they don't think they're control freaks until they're waiting to go into surgery and they realize, like, I cannot do anything for my dad who's going in to have surgery. Or if you're the person having surgery, like, I'm completely in someone else's hands. It's completely up to someone else to make sure I come out the other side of this okay. And yeah, so even when everything goes great, there's a sense of grief and loss. Part of what you're losing is that sense of I'm in control.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially in today's world, with all the modern advances that we have, especially now with AI coming into the foreground, I mean, I know even for preparing for this episode, I had to stop and just think about, man, this is way more easier, way more efficient than it would have been just 2 years ago. But I think at the same time, going back to what you were saying, we may be losing that bit of resilience, or maybe perhaps that side of us that is trying to the best of our abilities, figure out what to do when we don't have control.
I don't know what the right word is. Yeah, maybe it's resilience. But yeah, there's a depth, a maturity that you see in people who have had to go through that process of letting go, whatever letting go looks like, that you can't get any other way.
So let's go ahead and just get right on into the thick of it. Why do you think grief is such an uncomfortable emotion, mental state to talk about and deal with just overall?
I briefly mentioned just a little bit ago that there's layers to grief or layers to loss, but ultimately it's that idea of death. And we just we want to spend as much time as possible in our lives avoiding having to think about death, talk about death. Like we just want to live with this illusion that everything's just going to keep on going and everything's going to be just fine. I can come up with a plan. Um, there's nothing wrong with working out, obviously, nothing wrong with eating healthy. I think those are actually very wise things to do. But no matter how much we work out or no matter how healthy we eat, there's a line in one of the Creed movies where Rocky says, Father Time's undefeated, and that's true. So uh, when it's something that we don't understand, it again causes us to feel out of control. And and so we just avoid it, pretend it away as best we can.
Emotions are very important for us. They are a survival instinct that we've been given. They're necessary for us to function in daily lives. But why do you think, when it comes to being in a traumatic situation, dealing with a moment in time where we feel like we're in a crisis. Why do you feel it's so difficult, especially nowadays, for humans to open up? There's something in our culture that's
That's what I was getting at or thinking of as you were talking, like, is it a human condition or is it an American culture human condition? I it's probably a little bit of both. I always say my favorite Bible verse is John chapter 10, verse 10. Depending on the translation, it says Jesus came so that we can have life and have it to the full. And I think for most of my life, put it in the context of emotions, a full life means the absence of emotions that I might put in the category of bad. So full life means happiness and joy and peace and all these good things, and the absence of sorrow, sadness, confusion, doubt, that sort of thing. Now, I'm fully convinced a full life, the degree to which I'm able to experience joy is there's a correlation to how willing am I to enter into my fears, my anger, those those emotions we might put in the category of bad. I think the way they talk about it now is the high side of emotion or the low side of emotion. So if I'm actually willing to engage in what I'm experiencing and feeling when I'm on the low side of emotion, that can actually help me experience more of the high side of emotion as well. So, I mean, I grew up in north central Iowa on a farm, and it was you go out there and you do it, and it, as much as you put into it, that's what you can expect to get out of it. So if we work hard, we'll experience success in whatever that might be at school, um, ultimately with a job in sports, activities that you're involved in. And so it's up to you. And if things aren't going the way that we want them to be going, I just have to try harder, work harder, that sort of thing. And so instead of uh, wallowing in sorrow and sadness, it's pull yourself up by the bootstraps and keep going. And so ignore that sort of stuff and keep pushing toward what you like. That that's I don't think just a North Central Iowa farming culture mentality. I think that's the Protestant work ethic is really ingrained in who we are as Americans. There's I haven't watched this movie for a while, but it's one of my favorite movies. I was talking with my cousin about it recently. I'm pretty sure it's Japanese, and it's called Departures. And it's a guy who's a classically trained musician, and he sees an ad. They need someone to play. Pretty sure it was the cello. And he goes, so it turns out that Departures is all about when you die. And so the movie is all about caring well for the dead body. It's incredible and beautiful. And this guy, part of what he does is he plays uh, his instrument for it, but also he learns how to be. Mortician isn't the right word. It's a very different cultural reality. But that's what I'm trying to say. That they view death in a very different way than we, and they honor it in a way that makes sense. Is initially head scratching, but ultimately makes sense. So yeah, I don't know what it is about us, but I think there's something about us that just says let's avoid the low side of emotion. Let's pursue the high side of emotion.
how often do you hear the issue of isolation? How often is that coming up with you? Do you see it becoming more and more of a problem in today's society or even in the church culture? Is community starting to wane?
It doesn't come up as a topic of conversation very often. Um, what what is obvious is that people are looking for that in all sorts of ways, and they don't even know that that's what they're looking for. So um, when they find a gym that they like, it has less to do with how's this actually helping me exercise or get my body healthier, and it has more to do with the community that they find. when they're part of that particular gym, that they like this gym, and I'm not sure they can even verbalize it, but they like this gym or this book club or this neighborhood, or even when our kids are in activities, the connection that the parents find. Well, we like this coach. Well, I'm not sure it's you like the coach as much as you like the families that you're sitting in the stands next to, and you're building community that way. Um, where I see, uh, we have a son who's a freshman in college, and last fall, his first semester was challenging on all sorts of ways, just because you're a freshman in college. But one of the ways was, he was he's in a nursing program, and the college, we have a daughter who's gone to this college too. They have this great thing where your freshman year, they put you right away on day one with a group of about 16 freshmen that you're with throughout the year. Well, in the nursing program, they're all nursing students, and because he's a male nursing student, there's only like one other male in his group, and so it was tough for him to find connection early on. But I'd call him on the weekend, knowing he loves sports. Are you guys going to watch this game? Yeah, but everyone's just in their room watching it on their phone rather than going to the lounge and watching it in community. You know what I mean? So I think we see that reality happening in all sorts of ways, where people, uh, they may talk about the same shows, but they talk about it online rather than face to face. So, oh, did you see that episode of Survivor? What, uh, Traders? Lots of people love Traders these days. It seems like, yeah, and or the Traders. I don't even know what it's called. My wife loves it, but they don't talk about it with people. Well, it is people, but they're talking about it online rather than face to face. I'm not 100% sold on that being problematic as long as you're talking about it with someone, but I do think there's a place where face to face matters. Yeah.
I think it matters when, and what we're talking about, when a life turns in the direction that you did not want it to turn
Boom.
to.
That's right.
Because in those moments, when you need people the most, it's where do you turn to? And I think we're going to talk more about that later on, but it's, I know it's more convenient perhaps to just stay in your room and keep to yourself until it's not.
I wonder, even as you're talking there, Matt, I think there's an isolation that's even worse. Uh, and that's when you feel isolated when you're around people. So nobody knows how to talk about death. I'm now a widow or a widower, and I'm in my 40s, and I'm sitting at the game that my kid's playing in with these parents who also have kids playing, but nobody knows how to talk about this experience of grief that I'm in. And now I'm surrounded by people and I'm completely isolated. And uh, that's hard.
Yeah,
That's hard.
absolutely. Yeah. And obviously, you can't just start a conversation with, "Hey, my mom died."
Right.
Like,
Yeah. And that might not be the place for a conversation,
right.
but it can be a place to say, can we get together and continue to talk about the reality of what you're going through? If you feel like you have no one, if the other reason we avoid the low side of emotion is if we uh, people. So we have a daughter that we adopted. Uh, she was born deaf, has cochlear implants. Got them when she was 18 months old, and a lot of people still have never seen someone with cochlear implants. So sometimes it'd be like we're going through the checkout line at the grocery store, and the checker sees our daughter has cochlear implants, and we explain what's going on, and and all of a sudden it feels like we're having to care for the checker, because the checker's like, oh man, that must be so terrible and so hard. Is like they don't even know how to deal with it. Just observing it in some kind of hardship, observing hardship in someone else's life. I can't even deal with that. And then you, the person actually living with it, feel like you have to care for them. And then you're like, well, forget that. I'm the one that needs to be cared for. So whether it's, I don't know what it would be, you you lose your hair when you're going through chemotherapy, and it's obvious when you're at the checkout line, and if you find yourself having to care for people who are feeling bad because of the place that you're in, you're just like, I don't want that. I'll just order online next time. Then I don't have to deal with people.
I've never, well, I have considered that, but it's always more of a borderline subconscious idea in a sense. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Wow.
I think that shows up in all sorts of ways, where the person who really is in the place where they should be receiving support, this weird switch happens and they find themselves having to support and care for you or others.
Yeah, I think this is a very surface level example of this, but I mean, I think there's one scenario in which this exactly happens all the time, and it's the mom bringing the baby on the airplane, and it's like, look, she's this baby's 6 months old, like I can't help it,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But I've seen like those, videos or reels, whatever, like the mom bakes cookies and brings them on, or like these like little gift bags or like the surrounding.
Yeah. I am so sorry that I'm putting you through this. Yeah.
That's a whole nother
It
conversation
it
though about
is.
like, so how does society, what's the expectations, or how should society deal with certain individuals that it's not
That would
normal.
make for a
Life's not
great
normal for them.
podcast sometime.
There you go. Yeah. Maybe that'll be an episode. I'll have to take a note of that for sure. Um, do you notice a difference when you're speaking with someone who is dealing with grief or a traumatic event? Do you notice a difference in that person having a community versus someone that is left to their own devices? Have you had those conversations?
Sure. Yep. Without a doubt. Um, you can tell at services, when there's a funeral service, the the feel is completely different when there's a healthy community surrounding those who are now in that place of grief, compared to when, yeah, that community is just not there. There was a book, um, Bowling Alone, by Robert Putnam, Harvard sociologist, maybe late '90s, early 2000s. It came out, and part of what he was observing was the loss of community in our country. So 25 years ago, um, and stats from probably 30 years ago, and the number of people bowling was going up, but the number of people in bowling leagues was going down. So more and more people are bowling, but they're bowling alone. So that's and then he just kind of goes through and looks at statistics on community engagement, civic engagement, clubs that people are a part of, and seeing the same thing, like belonging to those kinds of community groups is just decline, decline, decline. And we see that in church world, all the time. But um, the other statistics that come out of that, they do research on. You probably know all about this in the health field, but like when you are in community, your mucus is less when you have a cold than it is if you're alone, and so healing happens more quickly when you're in community. I mean, it's just uh, one of the things they told us. Our daughter, um, that we adopted, was in the NICU for 8 weeks when she was first born, and she had contracted a virus during the pregnancy, and so they were trying to rid her body of that. She was basically on the HIV cocktail to try to shed the virus. And what the NICU nurses told us was, what's because she's just like laying there, can't do anything. I mean, babies can't do anything anyway, but uh, they said she's fallen behind because for these 8 weeks, there should be things that you're doing that you can't do. So they said what she's going to need is a stimulating environment. She's the youngest of 6 kids, and my wife and I kind of looked at each other and laughed and said, if they told us she's going to need a clean environment or an organized environment, we'd be like, oh boy, I'm not sure. but stimulating we can cover. And and to me, like that's what community does. It stimulates us in all of the ways that we need to be stimulated. Stimulates our thinking, stimulates our hearts, our emotional world, and can stimulate the parts of us uh, that work to heal.
Have you ever watched The Pit?
Oh, I have not.
You haven't? It's fantastic. I mean, it doesn't
Sure.
cut anything away because it is set in an ER setting.
And each episode is just one shift,
Each episode's 1 hour.
1 hour.
Yeah, which
God,
is
how do you
fantastic.
do character development?
Yeah.
But
Oh, it happens.
I like to wait for shows to have multiple seasons before I start because I don't like waiting from this season until the next season. But yeah, it's on my list.
Yeah, the first season's fantastic. There is plenty of character arc. Um, just finished. Well, I'm caught up finally on season 2. I'll watch like an episode when I'm at work, like on lunch or something, and I'll just like, it's amazing. Noah, I believe his name's Noah Riley. Is that the head actor? Noah Wiley,
Wiley. Yep.
the physician from ER, is, you know, if he didn't become an actor, he should have became a physician. He's got the traits. Now, some of it's obviously made for TV, whatever. But in season 2, um, spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it, I'm just gonna do it because I think it ties into what we're talking about here. Uh, there's a character in both seasons. His name's Lucas. He's a patient that is a frequent flyer, comes in all the time. Severe alcoholic, doesn't take care of himself. But in season 1, he's there, and it's always comforting when you see him on television, especially as a healthcare provider, because we all have that patient that is a frequent flyer, and then you just get to know them on a first name basis, and it's like, Dennis, you're here again, huh? Like, all right, how we doing? And then you get to know about their life, and oh, you have kids, and oh, you have siblings, and things like that. So Lucas in season 1 is that patient, and he's just there for the entire 12-hour shift. He just kind of pops in and out, and it's like, yeah, well, I think his name's Lucas. If I'm getting the character wrong, I apologize. But for those that have seen the show, you know who I'm talking about. He always has a smile on his face, even though he knows he's a severe alcoholic, and that's the reason why he's there. But in season 2, things don't go so well, and probably at least at this point, the emotional arc of the season is when Lucas unfortunately passes away. And why do I bring this up? I bring it up because it's thought that Lucas didn't have community. But then you hear his backstory and you hear about how, at the end of the day, life dealt him a really bad hand. And it's because of just what happened out of his control, that he ends up with an addiction problem, and that he ends up in the hospital. Um, and it ends up being what it is. The physicians don't just provide him care in a medical sense, but subconsciously they're providing him care in a communal sense, in this relational sense. And it doesn't hit everyone until he ends up passing away.
As you're relaying that story, I'm thinking about a class I had to teach last Sunday, and the subject for the class was, "Does God heal today?" And part of what we talk about is, there's most of the time when we use the word healing, we're thinking physical healing. I'm sick and now I'm not sick, right? There's an illness or a disease and it gets cured or uh, healed. But I think there's a emotional healing, psychological healing, uh, relational healing that takes place. And part of what I hear you describing, that character in the pit may not have healed from what alcohol was doing to him, but there might have been some healing that happened in that relational, emotional kind of realm in his life.
I want to dive into this idea of how does one bring our raw emotions to God? How can we approach him in a relatable way? Is it even possible to approach him in a relatable way? We were talking before we started filming. I think one of the best examples of what I'm speaking about, and for those of you that haven't seen this show, it's called The West Wing. It's an older show. It's got Martin Sheen in it. He's the president of the United States, and basically the show is a day-to-day look into the life of what it's like to live in the Oval Office. And there's an episode called Two Cathedrals where um, Mr. Sheen, I can't remember what his name is in the show though.
Bartlett.
Bartlett, President Bartlett goes. They're having a funeral at the two cathedrals because I believe it's his advisor or his assistant.
Yeah, but she was like almost like a mother figure to
Yes,
him.
absolutely. And to build the scene up, she finally gets a car that she's been wanting to get for quite some time. But then she gets killed by a drunk driver. And so President Bartlett, they're at the funeral. It's in the National Cathedral. It's very personal. It's very intimate. There's not a lot of people there. And then at the end of it, President Bartlett tells the CIA or the Secret Service to lock the cathedral down. And I think and again, I haven't seen every bit of cinema and TV out there, but I think it's probably the best realistic look at what I would say a raw and yet appropriate way, well, to some extent, uh, it is to just be upfront and personal with God. If you haven't seen the clip, you can go online, just type in West Wing, Two Cathedrals. It's fantastic, but I love that scene because I think it shows that I don't think they intended to do this, but um, it's okay to approach God in that.
Sure. Well, Pete Scazzaro, uh, written several books. I think it's in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. Says one of the greatest dangers of the spiritual life is an inability to live in reality. And I see that all the time. You look at your family of origin, look at my family of origin, look at how many um, well, we just don't talk about that kinds of realities there are. Well, and we pretend those realities away. So when it comes to, I mean, earlier in the talk today, like why don't we talk about that low side of emotion? Why do we just keep pressing on? Because we don't really know how to live in reality and invite God into those very real places. There's a whole category of psalms called the Psalms of Lament. Jesus quotes them when he's, dying on the cross. So um, the other thing I notice about Jesus is when Lazarus dies, there's the very famous verse, Jesus wept. But right before he weeps and right after he weeps, John, the writer of the gospel, says Jesus is angry. And so I tell grieving people, maybe you're going to follow the example of Jesus and cry a lot. Maybe you're going to follow the example of Jesus and be angry. And just remind yourself when you're angry, it's a Christ-like response to what you're going through. So, yeah, um, how do you trust God to be able to handle the fullness of your experience when you're going through grief like that? They do it really well in The West Wing. I love the spirituality of that show. Um, there's another movie that I use a lot. We've had staff retreats where I've asked our staff to watch this film and then talk about it in terms of how it relates to ministry. And it's called Lars and the Real Girl. And Ryan Gosling plays a guy who his mom died in childbirth when he was being born. And his dad never recovers from that. And his dad dies maybe a decade later. So he's raised really by his older brother. And he's living like in the garage when the movie begins. And he doesn't know how to deal with his grief. And what he ends up doing is ordering a blow up doll online and pretending he names her Bianca. She says she's a missionary from Brazil or something. She's on furlough, and um, but then Bianca contracts an illness, and Bianca, this made up girl, in his mind, he's like, she's sick. We need to take her to, and but it becomes a, all right, this seems like an inability to live in reality. But what they end up doing is pretending like it's real. And the church, the community, they all and ultimately Bianca dies. And they have a funeral for her, but going through all of that and being loved in that is what frees him up to get over, not over, work through the grief, that the real grief that he's experiencing, which is around the death of his mom. While he, like, Bianca's up in her bedroom, and the old women of the community stop by with casseroles, and he's just like, why are you here? This is what we do. You bring over casseroles and you just sit, and nobody says anything. You're just there, you're just present. And it reminds me of Job. When Job's in his season of suffering, his friends come to see him. And it says when they see how great his suffering was, they just sit in the dirt with him for 7 days and nobody says a word. That and you talk about bedside manners in the medical profession, or you talk about pastoral care in my profession. Sometimes zipping it, and not saying a dang thing is the best thing we can do.
I remember a sermon that you did. This was a long while back. You were talking about meeting families in the hospital, and you had mentioned, you know, in those moments, and I think about what I believe it's Peter talks about when asked, give a defense for your faith. Um, and I believe he says, give a reason for the hope
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you have.
Do it with gentleness and
Do it with,
respect.
yes, absolutely. I think that's a conversation for maybe another time, but I think that part gets left out quite
Yeah.
often. Gentleness and respect there. But you had said in those moments, people aren't asking for an apologetic reason as to why good things happen to bad people, or just why bad things happen in general.
They want some. I think what I said. So we had a staff member who had a medical emergency and died, and I was preaching this sermon like the week after that, and I was really like, one of the critiques our church gets. We would fall into the category of a megachurch, and I think your whatever your normal sort of uh, picture of a megachurch is, I'm not sure we line up super well with that. But by definition, a church that worships over 2,000 on a weekend is technically a megachurch. So that's us. And one of the critiques of megachurches is they have no depth, and uh, and sometimes depth gets defined as, can you defend the faith really well? Do you have all of the answers to all of these really big, really important questions that people are asking? And so I said something like, I think it's just interesting. My observation is when I'm in the hospital with people, nobody ever comes up to me and says, since I have you here, Scott, hey, what's the deal with, like, can women be ordained? Or what's the deal with infant baptism? Can we just take some time? What what they want to know in those moments is there a God, and does God care? And sometimes the answer to that question is your community is here. Like, if the church is the body of Christ, then God is here through the presence of your small group, your the people you volunteer with, your pastor. Yeah. So suddenly, what is deep, it isn't that great apologetic argument that you want to make. Suddenly, what's deep is love.
There's a study out there, or I guess it's a research paper. It's called the meaning making model. And we're going to dive into that here, but just be looking through my notes here just to make sure I get it correct. And if you think I'm veering off track, let me know here. But essentially, I'm just going to read this right off the page here. It's a framework for understanding how humans process trauma, serious illness, and significant life stress. And it was developed by a doctor named Crystal Park, and it looks into the process of how our minds attempt to bridge the gap between what we believe and then what has actually happened. And so there's a tension between two types of meaning that we have. So the global, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, that's more of like the overall foundational systems that we form.
I mean, is it your worldview? Would that be the
Probably
yeah?
like is the world fair? Am I in
Nice.
control? Like,
Yeah.
what am I living for? It's kind of like that feeling that helps make life, give some sense to life, the purpose.
I don't remember if she says it or if she's building off what others have said, that the brain is a meaning making machine. And from the very beginning of our lives, we're just like what we do all day is actually the same thing, not in terms of our job or our occupation, but in terms of like our brains are constantly trying to make sense of what we see and experience. And so early on in life, we develop this larger framework of global meaning.
Mm-hmm. And then the situational meaning are more specific events that I guess you'd say. So you have your global meaning, and then the situational meaning is like the two have to interact.
The way your global meaning develops is situation after situation after situation start to align. And so that's what gives you your global meaning, is the way I would think about it. Yeah.
So you go through an appraisal. This is whatever event is. This is a threat or this is a challenge. Why did this happen? God is testing me versus it was just bad luck. And so the most important part of the model is what they call the discrepancy.
Yeah.
So it's caused by the clash between the event, the situational event, and the global event. And then if you believe good things happen to good people, global, and then you get sick, the discrepancy creates intense psychological distress.
Yeah.
So that distress is the engine that forces you to engage in a meaning making model. I think the important thing that I got out of this was your worldview is, I think, a lot more important than people realize, because when a situational event happens, that situational event clashes with your worldview. And then whatever your worldview is going to essentially determine how you handle said situation.
Yes. No, it's really super. I think it's super important and helpful stuff because we all go through those moments of distress, and helping what the meaning making model is helpful for is understanding, oh, wait, when I'm in distress, one of the high probabilities is my global meaning, my situational meaning are out of alignment. So then figuring it out, how is this particular situation feeling disconnected from what I believe to be true, and then trying to make sense of all of that. Yeah, that's fast. So for me, um, one of the most helpful things was uh, getting to this place where, uh, life is paradoxical. So, yeah. So Christianity is the only monotheistic religion that is Trinitarian. In other words, we believe there's one God, but that one God exists in three unique persons, the Trinity. Well, a skeptic would say you can't have both ways. Which one is it? Is it one or three? And we would say by faith, we believe somehow it's both. It's a mystery. We can't fully explain it. Is God sovereign, or do I have free will? Yes. Is Jesus 100% human or 100% divine? He's 100% of both. So if my global meaning becomes like paradoxical in nature, then that's really going to help my situational meaning align with global meaning. But if I'm not comfortable with paradox, then I'm going to argue and fight and be like, well, this situation I'm having, does that mean God is sovereign and things are just going to happen to me and I have no control at all or no choice? Or the opposite, it's all up to me, it's 100% free will. But if my global meaning becomes paradoxical, that helps. It, my experience has been that helps me live in these moments of distress. Like, okay, how do I bring God into the midst of what I'm experiencing right now? If our brains are meaning making machine, then there's always a story we're telling ourselves that helps us make sense or give meaning to our experience. So, uh, back to what we were talking about earlier with community and how important is that? Somewhere purpose gets into this. So, if she's saying, when I'm in that place of distress where my global and situational meaning are out of alignment, um, what am I going to do with that? Give up or use it as a impetus for change, transformation? Like there's purpose is at the heart of that. So community gives us purpose. Like I'm going to do this for whatever, my wife, my kids. I was talking with someone who older, 70s, 80s, just came out of surgery that they may not have made it through. And with tears in his eyes, he says, I guess God's not done with me yet. So there's a purpose component to that. And so global meaning, there has to be some kind of a purpose component to that. And what I hear you saying is she's saying if we can keep that purpose connected in the midst of those places of distress, that can be well, I would probably argue that's how we grow and change and mature.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to understand that this is very nuanced.
Yeah, yeah.
And and the reason why we're talking about it is because at the end of the day, I think it gets very much overlooked at just how important our mental well-being is in times of crisis, in times of distress. But and I also don't want to necessarily say that, religion is the answer, because it's also shown that if religion is too rigid, if someone's sense of spirituality is too um, essentially in a box, that it can have a huge negative outcome based upon, oh, well, God's punishing me, or my sin is the reason as to why this is going on.
I was talking with someone who an older adult with children, and they were concerned about are do my children have faith and are they going to make it to heaven? And that was stressing her out so much it was causing real physical harm. And 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 the doctors were telling her like you need to reduce your stress. But the thing that was causing her stress was her worry and fear about the salvation of her kids. So like her religion was killing her. In a sense. So I wonder, Matt, when we're talking about why don't we hang out in that low side of emotion? Even as I just started to talk about purpose, isn't that one of the reasons we don't hang out in the low side of emotion? Like I've got to find the purpose in this pain, and once I do, then I can be back in the everything's great, everything's joy, joy. So what if the purpose is, oh, even though things are out of alignment and distressed and not going well, I'm not alone. There are still people who care for me and love. Like sometimes the purpose might be to actually get in touch with your sorrow, your sadness, your anger, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I remember there was a reel that I came across, and it's I didn't hear the conversation. I just heard the 30 seconds that they that the algorithm thought was appropriate for me. But it was Austin Butler, and he was getting interviewed. And there was a line that he said that I thought was like, oh, that's really interesting. I've never thought of it. But he said, embarrassment is an underused emotion. Um, and I just thought of that because I think it's a necessary evil to have our mental state go into times of sadness, times of anger, times of confusion. Because, and I have no research to back this, so I'm just saying off the top of my head, but I think those are so necessary because it helps us become more well rounded, more nuanced in our thinking, more nuanced in how we view the world. There's a reason why I want my children to travel and I want to take them to different cultures and to see different things because I didn't leave the country until I was 18 or 19 years old. I went to Eastern Europe, uh, to the country of Albania specifically, but just having a different mindset, seeing a different outlook on life, seeing different circumstances that people live through helped me better understand, wow, like this, your life is not, what the little town that you live in. It's necessary to sometimes have life throw you a curveball. And hopefully, based upon your global view of things, you can have a better understanding. Maybe not have the answer of like why bad things happen to good people, but maybe just a more nuanced approach to trying to make a little bit more sense of that.
What I hear you saying is our global framework of meaning should always be under a state of remodeling. So I remember when I first took the Myers Briggs personality thing for the first time, and it was in college, and I was in a class with a friend I'd been friends with. Like we were on t-ball together, we were in high school together. Now we're in this class in college, and and when I found out his Myers Briggs was different than mine, I was floored. How's that possible? Like we agree on everything. We like the same, like completely different Myers Briggs. So boom, there's a remodeling, a shift in the global meaning framework. Like, oh, people see the world very differently than I do. Same thing for me. It was 18 wasn't, yeah, 18. I went to France. 20, I went to Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland. And you just like things are very, oh, these are the people we were supposed to be scared of. It was still like just a year after the USSR ended, or the Berlin Wall came down. And they're out tilling fields with horse-drawn plows. And you're just like, okay, there's more to this than what I've been able to see or experience. The other thing I keep thinking is one of the things that the medical profession and Christian theologians in particular, have in common is an interest in the human body. Like the Christian faith is incarnational, like it's in the body. There's something about the body that is super important to this whole experience of life, and we might be coming at it from. I think we're coming at it from more of a similar place than dissimilar place, but we're approaching it differently. But there's something about that. So the health of the human body, the health of our emotions, or how does our brain function? I mean, I view myself an amateur neuroscientist, but like what they're figuring out and discovering about how our brains work, it's just fascinating to me, and how much that impacts spiritual health, physical health, whatever. Like, let's keep pursuing that, and how can that continue to help us remodel this global framework of meaning?
Couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up. But this wasn't a question I sent to you, so it's going to be
Let her fly.
throw you for a loop. Maybe not, but I was listening to. Have you ever heard of the YouTube channel Diary of a CEO?
No.
No? Okay. It's this gentleman, and he basically just interviews anyone that he finds interesting. I love it. He does a very good job. Have you heard of Wes Huff?
Yes.
So he was on the show.
Okay.
This episode released, at least from the time of our recording, a week ago. And one of the questions he asked Wes was, Bible sales are the highest they've ever been since like in a 25-year period. I think in 2024 was when he picked when the research was out. So and then this is unfortunately, but I think the younger generation from like 18 to 25, um, there's high amounts of suicide rate. So, and then there's also like basically a pandemic of isolation and depression. And where he was getting at was there is a resurgence in people seeking meaning and people wanting to get in more of a existential idea of what's my purpose here. I think he said also like I think it's just over. You might know this off the top of your head too. I don't know, like just over half of Americans don't go to church. Do you think we're coming to a point, like at least our current society? Do you think there is a yearning, finally a movement to the question of what am I supposed to do with this life? It can't just be clocking into work, you know, getting a retirement, th- things like that. People are clearly searching for a meaning behind the sense of all this.
I think they've always been searching for meaning. There's been a belief that the the meaning is going to be connected to if I have enough money or if I have enough success, if I achieve enough. And then so I remember my uh, modern Western civilization prof, fall of 1990, said to these freshmen at Central College, your generation is the first generation that, on average, won't make more or won't be wealthier than your parent. I think he's maybe off by a generation, but the point was that's the direction things were moving. Um, and so yeah, so our oldest is 26, and there's definitely this sense of I want to go to work knowing that I'm going to be making a difference, not just making a paycheck or not just making money for the corporation that I'm working for, but I'm actually making a difference. So, yeah, that sense of meaning and purpose is shifting. That meaning is now connected to, um, I'm going to say serving others, but I'm not sure that's what people think they're doing. Uh, I think they're still serving themselves, even as they're serving others. What does that mean for the church? I think is an interesting question. After 9/11, there was an immediate surge, and then it died died away pretty quickly. So historically, there have always been these. I think there's a movie out now about the Great Awakening. Oh, this is fascinating. We love Hamilton, the musical, and we're constantly listening. And I just got a book. Uh, what's It's not called Founding Fathers, um, but it's about the founding fathers. I don't remember. So I'm reading the chapter on Aaron Burr, and there's a lyric in Hamilton where he sings, My grandfather was a fire and brimstone preacher." So in this book I'm reading, it says his grandfather is Jonathan Edwards. And Jonathan Edwards is the preacher during the Great Awakening, this movement in American church history. But his famous sermon is called "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." and and I don't think we're going back. Well, I'll be careful. I do think there might be a movement where that's what people think they want. They want this certainty around right and wrong, around morality, and that's what's going to be what saves America, or I don't know what. Uh, but that doesn't seem what Jesus is interested in. Jesus is interested in casting a vision. He calls it the kingdom of God. But we started with John 10:10. I've come that you may have life to the full. When Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, he's explaining when when human life is flourishing, when community is and connection is flourishing and abundant, here's what it can look like. And you see him just constantly describing it and then inviting people to follow him and to live in such a way that that human flourishing actually starts to happen. So uh, I am hopeful that actually we will end up there. Uh, there might be a that even as Bible sales are going up, the flourishing of the world might go down for a while, but then eventually there'll be a reconnection because it will create a global, like, if I just follow all the rules and if I'm just obedient and moral, that should make everything better. And people are going to discover that's not what actually makes things better. Um, it's your character in the pit who keeps showing up, and why in the world can't he figure out that his drinking is going to kill him, but he's loved in the midst of it? That's that's what's going to actually change things.
It's funny that you bring up Lucas. I think his name's Lucas. Again, I apologize. There's some fandom out there that right now
Yeah,
that's like yelling at the
come
screen
on,
if it's
man.
wrong. Seriously. Um, it's interesting that you bring him back up because I'll just spoil it again. Sorry. Um, the reason is discovered why he has a drinking problem. So he used to be the groundskeeper at the I forget what the stadium is that the Steelers play in.
Okay,
He used to be the
Heinz Field, or
Heinz Field,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
that. He used to be the groundskeeper there. And he was married, and for the longest time he didn't want kids. But then finally his wife convinces him to have kids. And if I get choked up right now, I'm sorry, but it's a fantastic scene. It's not a fantastic story, but it's a fantastic part of the show. So his wife finally convinces him to have kids. He finds out she's pregnant. Lucas is thrilled. Then his wife and unborn child get killed in a car accident. And that's what
Sure.
spurs on the addiction problem. And nobody knows that story except for Noah,
Mm,
the main
the main
Robbie,
doctor.
Dr. Robbie. No one knows that except for him, um, until they are having their moment of silence for Lucas at the end of it. And then that, of course that happens and you're like, "Oh my gosh," like you see it from a different lens. And so how it ties back to what we're discussing is maybe that sense of community, had he received it earlier, perhaps could have taken him down a different path, or maybe subconsciously he was yearning for that community, and so he kept going back to the ER.
Is it there's a study they do on rats where they have rats in cages and they lace the water bottle with like cocaine. And there's two water bottles, one that doesn't have any drugs in it, one that does have the drugs in it. And if they're alone in that cage, they find the drug and they keep going back to the drug. But if they're in a cage with other rats, they don't go to the water bottle with drugs in it. They go to the just the regular water. And so the point of the is that there's something about connection and community that's connected to addiction. I don't know. I mean, again, there's no formula to this stuff, in my opinion. We want there to be. We want certainty. I'm not sure life's going to give us a whole lot of certainty. But if what's the difference between condemnation and compassion? And like when is it called for? And almost always, seems like Jesus leads with compassion. And of course, there are things that need to be condemned, but uh, like you said, when you hear the story of why someone ends up the way they are, it almost always makes sense. So if the starting place could be compassion for how they end up there, um, rather than condemnation, I wonder how that might shift uh, our meaning making models also. Yeah.
And with that, I think that is a good spot to end. Not only, but I'm also I have to be out of here in like 2 minutes. No, shout out to Blue Bean Coffee Co. for allowing me to rent this space out. But Pastor Scott, thank you
Oh,
for coming on to the show.
thanks for asking.
I think it was a fantastic
Rich
start.
conversation.
Yeah.
I enjoy it. Yeah,
And hopefully we'll have you on again.
that would be fun.
All right.
Look forward to it.
Until next time, everybody, take care, and we'll see you on the next episode.